Now that the smoke is cleared, it's time to build a store that once sold a federally illegal product. Yeah, it's pretty complicated. From security vaults to zoning nightmares, CA in the cannabis retail is a whole new level of headaches. So how do we keep the project going? Let's get into it. Welcome to What the RFI. I'm at Brennan, and this is the podcast all about CA. We're going to get straight into this one today. I'm really excited about this show. And this is something I personally haven't had a chance to design or be part of through the beginning of it. But I do have a very special guest on today's call. And before we get into that, I just want to explain the industry, and David's going to correct me here. Is the whole industry has really changed over the last 6 years, give or take, just with the policies coming in place and so on. And of course, what the show is all about is construction administration, and that plays a big role in terms of these types of projects. So, with that said, enough said from me. Welcome to the show, David.
You so much. Really appreciate doing this and been wanting to do this for a while. So thank you very much.
Yeah, well, thank you for like reaching out. You discovered the pod show, podcast, and everything, and yeah, and here we are. So, so tell like as we get into it, put your plug in. Tell us about your company because that's really the show is going to be about that and the challenges that you face day to day in the construction world.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So my name is David Fetner, and I'm one of the managing partners of Grow America. We are probably the only, if not one of the few, national coast to coast design build firms that specialize exclusively in the cannabis industry. So all we do are cannabis projects. We don't take on, schools or restaurants or build anything else, just cannabis. We are design build, we do consulting, project management, anything that has to do with the cannabis facility, we take care of.
Well, and I can only imagine the challenges, and like I said, we're going to dive into that today. So, for the listeners, for even myself too, because I know probably this much compared to what you know, because of the history, and you've been doing it for so long in that respect. Like, so right away, okay, so I just want to hire you right now to basically design a building to get going. So let's talk about construction at this point, but just kind of walk us through your typical process, what you would do different than any
Mhm.
other architect in that sense.
Well, first off, where, right? Where are we going to do it?
Yeah.
Because it's only legal in a certain amount of states, right? I think we're at like 22 or 23 states now. And once we say, okay, it's legal in the state, now let's go dive in a little bit deeper. Is it legal medicinal or is it full adult use?
Okay.
And then I'll say, well, where else is the location? I have to look at the county and the town because just because it's legal in a state, let's say Michigan,
Hmm.
that doesn't mean every town and county has opted in. Now we have to check the legality of the county. So you really go from the macro as far as what state into the micro, what's the legality in the township. Um, my background, I was a zoning attorney for 20
Hmm.
some years.
Yeah.
So I look into the day one, what's the zoning of the property? What's the zoning of the project?
Yeah.
And then what are we building, right? Are we going to build an indoor cannabis grow? Are we going to build a dispensary, manufacturing? I'll back up for 1 second. There's three main components in the cannabis industry that us as architect and builders are responsible to build. You have your cultivation facility, which is an indoor agricultural, just like any CES facility.
Yeah.
Then you have your retail, which is a
Okay.
dispensary, which I'm sure many people are familiar with, but depending whether it's medicinal or adult use, those can be a little bit different. And then there's manufacturing, which is kitchens where you make gummies, chocolates,
Okay.
edibles,
Yeah. Yeah.
infusion. You're creating vapes, right, for the vape cartridges. Um, you're doing, tinctures, topicals. So those are the three main components. Sometimes they're allowed to be all under the same roof. Sometimes they're not allowed to be. Again, it really goes state to state.
Right. And then like the actual within state to state, within do you find within the cities it's a little bit different? Like again, from
Oh
city to
yeah,
city, again, the bylaws, the zoning all definitely changes. Sometimes they don't even like let
it's
so many here
all
in the
so different.
yeah.
Right. When we build in Manhattan, obviously, you're going to be a lot closer to the next dispensary as if you're going to somewhere in the suburbs or in the rural areas where you have to be 1,500 feet or 2,000 feet.
Okay.
There's different distances between churches, schools, daycares.
Right.
More dense town will waive those limits, right?
Yeah.
So they'll say, well, it's going to be impossible to do your business unless you're 500 feet, or less from a school or a daycare. Other cities say, well, we have to stick to the 1,500 or 2,000 foot,
Yeah.
guideline. So it is very different, and that's on the zoning part of it.
Yeah.
And then you get into construction, and that's a whole nother ball game
Right.
too.
So with the permit, do you get clients that come to you and be like, "Hey, Dave, I just got this retail space and I need you to outfit it," and you come in and go, "It's a dead. Like I can't do anything because
Oh,
there's someone
oh,
already here."
I'm so glad you asked. Not just that, but my heart sinks when a client comes to us and says, I have a signed lease, I have an LOI,
Yeah.
meet me at the site. I say, great. And I walk in, and what you just, described happens. But worse is if it's for cultivation, let's say, and I walk in and they only can have access to single phase power at 200 amps.
Hmm.
And there's no substation nearby. There's no way to bring in three phase. And I'm looking at them and I'm like, we are never going to get you a viable facility with what we have here as far as infrastructure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, maybe some operators come into that situation, they can afford 1.5 million to 200 mil, $2 million to bring power.
Yeah.
But your typical operator can't afford that. Their project is dead, and now they're on the hook with the property.
Yeah.
So
No,
it
this
happens a lot.
right. And like in this whole process of kind of this planning and everything too, like security concerns, does that impact the design, the construction? Like, whether it's theft,
Hmm.
again, you've already talked about can't be so close to schools and churches and all that kind of stuff because that's just,
Hmm.
the community and parks. Anything else from a security standpoint when you're designing these facilities?
Absolutely. Yeah, on the security part for retail for dispensary, you know, you have to have special security film on the windows and glass.
Okay.
In fact, 3M makes a really good product called Dense Shield.
Mm,
But also, it's like a cross between a jewelry store and a bank, right?
okay.
Um, every facility has to have a vault.
Yep.
You have to have limited access areas, key card, fobs.
Hmm.
Um, if you're in an area that's a little bit more high risk, you can take more precautions. If you have, for instance, let's say you have a neighbor and you have adjoining, I don't know, restaurant or
Hmm.
whatever else, you have to put a barrier mesh on those demising walls.
Right. Yep.
So, 9 gate security mesh. So you really have to look at the whole components and, a security package for a facility, for either, doesn't matter, grow or dispensary, they're upwards of hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So,
It's
yeah.
very interesting where you can't just, get your license, get your permit and open up shop. You really have to think budget. I know everybody has to think budget, but especially in a cannabis type building, there's so many ancillary costs that go into it that if you don't really know, it could be a project killer.
Right. And like thanks for bringing up budget because like definitely like again we're just talking about the planning side right now like mechanical wise that's a whole probably a different game
Oh
than
yeah.
you're in your standard retail your clothing Gap store or something like that. This is a different
Hmm.
thing, and like I said, out of those kind of three categories, you're gonna again if you're growing then that's a total different HVAC system. But even on the general
Hmm.
one, are you finding that big changes? And again, that's where things can escalate.
Yeah. 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 On the retail side, of course, you're going to want to have climate control in the vault.
Hmm.
Um, some towns still require odor mitigation in the dispensaries. They don't want anybody walking by. The standard is
Yeah.
somebody should be able to walk by and not smell cannabis, right?
Yeah.
So how are you going to achieve that? Some towns have stricter regulations. There's zone, and definitely on the cultivation side, the HVACD is the number one most important component.
Hmm.
But the odor mitigation system on that is as well, right? Carbon filters, positive pressure type system. Sometimes use a high pressure fog system to really hit any type of exhaust with it's a 1000 psi pressure that eliminate any residual odor. So there's a lot that goes into the mechanicals, the HVACD, because the dehumidification of the project is the most important part out of anything.
Hmm.
So yeah, the mechanicals, we could spend 2 hours
I
going over
bet.
the mechanicals and the CA on the mechanicals.
And even electrical too. You're like your lighting and
Yeah.
all that.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a product. You want to sell it. You
So
want to give that
you want
best
to
guy.
sell, and it's going for a lot of money too. If you think about how much per pound, average is around 2,500 to $3,000 a pound.
Yeah.
Some states it's less, some states it's more, but that's a very expensive commodity. So
Hmm.
when we're designing these facilities and we're running CA on these facilities, we have to be so particular and so exact and so dialed in, because if once the plants are in and the facility's commissioned and things aren't growing right,
Mm.
they're looking at us, right? The designer, the builder. What's
Right.
went wrong? Could be hundreds of thousands of dollars in loss. Um, you know, we have to look how to mitigate certain risks, such as mildews and mites, and people bringing in different type of hazards. So we really have to design to every single what could go wrong question.
Yeah, no, and you're right. And like kind of getting back to the retail and the lighting, one thing when we were in Vancouver, we were doing the Shangri-La Hotel, and then of course it was joined up with an urban fair. Well, urban fair was a
Mhm,
knockoff from our typical everyday person grocery store called Save on Foods, but this was more the high end grocery store. So they
mhm,
went beyond the standard, just fluorescent tubes to basically spotlight that apple. So when you did look at it, you're like, wow, that apple looks really good. Even though it's the same apple in any other grocery
yeah.
store, it's funny, but it is so true because lighting is so key. And I find architects today, it just miss that, so many times they don't even think about that. And when you have a project that's just lit up, it's incredible. And retail's got that from day one with anything. And again, especially in your industry,
Oh
like you're
yeah.
saying. And so you don't
Y-
cheap out
You
on
know
that.
what? Don't cheap out on lighting. On the retail side, we learned early on from one of the bigger companies, MSO, it's called, it's a multi-state operator. They really put a lot of care and detail into their custom light fixtures and their
Sure.
architectural
Yeah.
lights. They thought, they could cut costs on this or that, but lights, they were not going to spare any expense. And people comment on the lights all the time, how it
Hmm.
lit up the facility, um, what you see when you walk in. It adds a high end atmosphere to it. And so
Yeah.
you have to have a concept that you stand out, and a nice way to do it that was lights. And ever since then, I really spent a lot of time on the lights.
That's awesome. No, that is really cool.
It makes sense. Yeah.
And then, like, as we're talking mechanical, electrical, the energy side of things, again, from state to state, how are they mandating like energy code challenges? Like, are you being forced to put in solar PV? There's all or are you kind of have flexibility, or is there good trade offs between that when you're doing the design?
Yeah. That's a phenomenal question. So obviously, these facilities on the grow site take up a ton of
Yeah.
energy. Um, and right now, you're still technically allowed to use HPS lights,
Okay.
although nobody really does. But to incentivize operators, almost every state's local power company has massive rebates for LED.
Hmm.
So if you're buying, let's say a $600 light, because each light is about $500 to $800. So
Hmm.
some can go close to 2,000,
Okay.
but they'll give you enough rebates where that light may end up costing you $100, or it may end up
Yeah.
costing you nothing.
Yeah.
I've seen that where customers have gotten their lights basically for free with the amount of rebates they've gotten back. The rebates also extend to the HVAC system. And of course, with solar, that's becoming bigger and bigger in industry right now.
Yeah.
Solar used to be very hard to run a facility off of. And still, you can't do a whole facility off of solar. But the rebates that are coming with solar, it's the no-brainer to install. And we're really finding good ways to utilize it, bank the power with solar, do like a hybrid system. Energy is the one thing that we really haven't cracked the code on because there's no way to grow cannabis without using a lot of energy.
It is challenging. Like even with the schools, we've done the solar PV and that kind of stuff. We've done geothermal and then through the
Hmm.
mechanical system. But again, that's a much bigger project. That's just a $30
Well,
million school
it,
versus what you're
hmm well, I'll tell you what, the geothermal is interesting. We were working with a greenhouse company, right?
okay.
Sealed positive pressure type greenhouse company, and they were utilizing geothermal.
Nice. Okay.
Phenomenal system. Okay. Um, it worked great. Problem was, it's very expensive up front. And in
Yeah.
cannabis, an operator can't go and get a bank loan. It's all privately funded.
Hmm.
They're paying very high interest rates. Every penny counts. And so when you're going to
Yeah.
put a project together, it may be great to use geothermal. The ROI may really work out long term,
Hmm.
but nobody has that capital up front to spend on a system like that, unfortunately.
Yeah, exactly. And like it's like you said, ROI and the term return to investment too. Like they may only be doing it, they're hoping they're in
Oh,
challenge.
yeah.
They want to do it for, that's their career goal, but maybe they, something happens where, some pandemic or whatever, you put blockage or whatever the case is, and that only lasts 5 years. And then the amount of debt that they was owing or anyways. Yeah, exactly. It's a very expensive,
Yeah.
it's for the long game to get your
Right.
paybacks back. So, yeah, very cool. And then I guess even the last question about kind of the energy stuff too, like, you know, doubling up insulation, like we've got passive houses, being built and that kind of stuff. And that kind of same theory being put on commercial buildings of kind of doubling up the insulation, triple pane windows, just again to keep it cool,
Well,
but probably doesn't really apply in your case, or does it?
well, you know what we use? So almost exclusively for the cultivation facilities, we use IMPs, right? Insulated
Hmm.
metal panels.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
um, you know, like what you'd see, what freezers or coolers are built out of, but different. Um, the 3 inch, 4 inch, 5 inch, 6 inch thickness, sometimes even 10 to
Yeah.
12 inch thickness.
Hmm.
They have very high R values, and each plant touching room is built out of these panels.
Right.
And it's great because it creates its own climate, its own atmosphere where you're not worrying about if there's a draft or if you have really bad R value at the roof. It's not going to affect the room itself. The
Gotcha.
room, the room is its own. It's basically a building within a building.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you on that. It makes total sense. And the last question was in this design phase, you getting a lot of big pushback from the municipalities? Like you're waiting for this permit. What is the average lifetime of permit? And again, I'm sure it changes from state to state in that sense. But
Yep.
is there, yeah, some give you more troubles than others? You don't have to
Yeah.
name the
Oh,
state.
absolutely. I mean, with the permitting, every municipality is going to scrutinize a cannabis permit more than any other type of permit,
Yeah.
because there's still, even though it's getting such mainstream, there's still a stigma to it. Sometimes you're still going to have people who are going to complain. You're
Mhm.
still going to have concerned neighbors. So they're really going to dot the I and cross that T more than any other permit I've been involved in. Right? I built for 25 years. The scrutiny of a permit for a cannabis facility is unlike anything else.
Yeah.
And then on inspections, right? When you get final inspections too, you'll always know when there's that one inspector that is anti-cannabis
Yeah.
and thinks it's a bad thing for the neighborhood because
Yeah.
the things I've seen that they've rejected, it would blow your mind. But yeah, no, the permitting process, and oh, you know what? Don't forget, we have to also apply through the state. So we're not just
Okay.
applying to the local municipality or the city. Permit plan has to go to the state, whether that's their Department of Agriculture or the Cannabis Regulatory Commission. So a state agency has to review it, approve it. The local municipality has to review it and approve it. And then on inspection, same thing. State also has to come out and inspect after the city's inspected. So
Yeah.
we're getting a double whammy all the way, down the board.
No kidding. That sounds like fun. How do you budget for that in terms of
Exactly. It's what the funny thing is, we're used to it now. We've been,
Yeah.
I guess we're in our eighth or ninth year of doing this. And so for us, that's just the norm.
Yeah.
But yeah, in the beginning, it was hard to manage. It was hard to figure out our time. How are we timing out our general conditions? How am I figuring out how much time to our construction administrator? Some of these can go on for, a year, year and a half process, before we even put shovel into ground.
Yeah. So you get the issued for permit. You rejoice. You did it. Plans are
Yes.
approved.
All right.
You're ready to rock and roll. The client is paid. The client's really happy. Issue for construction and off to the races with us. So
Yep.
right off the get
Glorious
go,
day.
glorious day. Everyone's excited. Light up one. Here we go. And at this point, what is going to be your first challenge? Right off the get go, like you talked about transformers, which you would have already
Yep.
identified
Yep.
that. But if they did say, "Hey, we're going to go
hmm
ahead," you would have been ordering that probably in advance of the
Yes, but
permit.
there's always setbacks, right?
Yeah.
Just like in any construction project. But on the retail side, it's about a 3-month project, right? About 12 weeks.
Yeah.
Um, we don't run into too many issues. There's always, oh, this was back ordered, or there's custom
Hmm.
millwork, and that's not exact. But on the grow side, what we do is, because the plant touching areas are so particular, we have a separate plant touching project manager, right? That
Okay.
runs the plant touching areas, and then you have different superintendent for all the common areas, because we always say, what can go wrong will go wrong in a cannabis grow. It's very much a Murphy's law.
Yeah.
So we really have to watch those areas very closely. Um, I can run into so many situations where once we start construction, we've hit this roadblock or that roadblock. I don't know how atypical it is to any other construction project. We all deal with, speed bumps and hurdles we have to take. I would say just that one challenge that we encounter is that whole plant touching area. That it, the problem is, you don't know what you don't know unless you've done it.
Yeah.
So you have to hire trades that have done it before. Whether we're
Hmm.
doing it in California or New York or New Jersey, the struggle is to find the electrician, the HVAC subcontractor, plumber that has done fertigation, that has
Yeah.
done, maybe a VRF system, electricians that know how to hang the lights and set up the rooms and the automation. So that's where the challenge come into. Is really the team.
Right. And it's a good point because, like, and one of the challenges right off the get go, like, we had 10 daycares being all built, and they were the same building, but just different sites and everything. And the course, we had the plague here, COVID and everything, and it was
Yeah.
just killing the supply chain. So, like, for us getting a Snyder electrical panel, yeah, it would have been 3 months before. This suddenly turned into 12 months. Well, these buildings were only
Oh
supposed to be
yeah.
built in an 8 month project time period, right? So the first
hmm
shop drawing that we were, knocking at the GC's door saying, "You got to get us the shop drawing. You should have got that the moment you signed up when we awarded you the contract. Like, we need to get this
hmm
reviewed, given back to you, and do that." But the fact that you're dealing with the electrical side of things, you're dealing with the HVAC. How are you finding the supply chain issues as of right now in terms of timelines?
Better, but I'll even go one step further with that. Is you're also only as good as your vendor or your
Hmm.
subcontractor, right? Great, we can have shop drawings. They better order it when you give them the deposit. They better not sit on it, or the vendor better order it. So
Yeah.
you really have to make sure you're on top of it, because we've had that situation where we thought something was ordered, check in 2 weeks later, and oh, it hasn't been ordered yet. And supply chain is one thing you can always modify, right? We can always figure out, hey, maybe we get a generator trailer backup for an extra month or two,
Hmm.
or we have to, take power away from the non-essential areas and run the grow rooms. Because when we're doing a cannabis facility, the cultivation manager or the head grower has to know when he's ready to bring plants in. So he may have plants in a nursery, and if we say, okay, September 1, we can turn this place down, you can bring plants in, he's already growing in his nursery, ready to bring those plants at whatever stage, whether they're, at the vet stage or maybe even ready to bring it to bloom. And if we're not ready to have those rooms turned on, those plants could be dead. He may lose them. He can
Right.
keep them at bay as long as he can. But if we're delayed a month, 2 months, and we can't turn power on, and we can't get lights going, and we can't get, HVAC system moved on, that's a big problem.
Yeah.
So we always have to adapt. I was quoted, Rolling Stone the other day had an article about can you adapt as a emerging industry, and I said, you just don't say no.
Yeah.
No can't be in your vocabulary. If an electrician says it's impossible for me to get power to these rooms, I have to say, no, it's not. Let's find out another way, right? Like I said, whether it's
Mhm.
a generator or two generators, or turning off this whole side of the building, or running power, at night and then during the day, kind of flipping it.
Eesh.
You have to find
Yeah.
out a way to get those rooms on because, like I said, it's such an expensive commodity.
Yeah.
It's the risk of loss is what fuels us, right? To
Yeah.
keep pushing ahead, and so
No, it makes sense. And
it's
like just
yeah.
and you mentioned one thing I just want to kind of take a step back with the shop drawing stage. Because again, in a typical public tender project, architects kind of leading it, GC submitting the
Yep.
shop drawings,
Oh
review and
yeah.
all that. Well, you guys are a design build in that sense. Like you're not outsourcing an architect typically, or are you, or is there that odd job where you have to?
Typically, we're not, but there are certain specialties we have to outsource, of course.
Yeah.
And I know that a lot of your conversations, have to do with specs and CA. You know, we sometimes issue spec books that are 900 to 1,000 pages
Hmm.
for
Yeah.
like a 30,000 square foot facility. And again, I don't know outside of my world. I never did projects as large as we're doing now when I was doing my past projects. So for me to see a 900-page spec book and every single page is used and
Hmm.
utilized and
Yeah.
reviewed, you cover a lot of bases there. But it's very important to make sure that you've got everything covered.
Right. Right. And again, being the
Like when you were
design.
doing a school,
Yeah.
when you issued a spec book, how large did they range? Like
They
what was
were
the how many
they were
pages?
yeah, they were 2,000. They were a thick, 3
Okay, I'll
inches
say
thick.
those are big ones. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
well, exactly. Because then it was all your divisions, right? Because you went to the doors, your
Hmm.
general material, to your curtain wall, like, millwork, interior glazing. You know what I mean? The list went on, right? Because you're calling up everything, and because it was a publicly tender project, it's a little bit,
Oh yeah,
different. But again,
yep.
with you to design build, you've got a little bit more flux, functionality just to kind of go back and forth. And I imagine the shop drawings are going to be turned around a lot quicker too, because again, you're not going through this kind of,
Of course, but we
pass.
still have to scrutinize it
Yep.
because it's still at the end of the day, we have even a bigger liability that we're both the builder and the designer.
Yeah.
So we really have to have we have a two-step process for reviewing the shop drawings between our construction team and our architect. But
Yeah.
the public works. Interesting, you mentioned that. So I don't know if you're familiar, but the state of New York did a public works project for cannabis. It was the first of its
Okay.
kind,
Okay.
and we were actually one of 8 firms that were awarded the projects.
Nice.
And
Well,
you're right. I think those spec books were twice the size of our
just
typical one. Now that I think about that,
yeah.
they required a hefty set of specs. So yeah.
Wow. Well, that is crazy. And like, what about like RFIs too? Because again, you're the one. You're talking with
Oh yeah.
yourself. Like, so you are issuing RFIs within your team. You're tracking those kind of.
A hundred percent we are. Internally, as much, if not more, RFIs between our team because really we're going to get them back from the subs,
Yeah.
but also we need to clarify things. And we've seen a lot of different ways these buildings have been built. They're not cookie cutter. So, the facility we're doing in, like I said, California or Montana or New York,
Mhm.
they're not the same. And even the ones within the state are not the same. They're all very different. They're all snowflakes.
Right. Well,
So
and
the
you're right.
RFIs, we always want to make sure we're doing it right.
And that's the thing. Like everyone, and we can put a glass on the table and say, all right, describe the glass. Like you're going to see one thing of it. And that's the same thing with a
Mhm.
building. Like I was saying that there was daycares or whatever. There was 10 of them out
Yeah.
there, same building, same blueprints, not a single change other than one wall was stretched out, a couple extra feet just to give again a couple of space for the kids. But anyways, at the end of the day, we got a variety of RFIs, even though it was the exact same plan. So
Mhm.
same thing with you. It depends who's working on it. I would imagine again, you're building your A team. In certain states, you've got that key, team that rocks it. So they are not going to ask you other questions, but they're still going to ask you questions.
Yeah, right. Again, sometimes it could be a greenhouse, not a
Yep.
warehouse build. Sometimes it could be a VRF system. Sometimes it's a packaged integrated unit. Sometimes it's a chiller system. Sometimes so HVACD alone can be 4 or 5 different components. So yeah, we just want to be better safe than sorry too. Again, we've seen what goes on out there and the horror stories, and we don't
Mhm.
want to be part of any of those. So we just make sure we really Dot the I's, cross the T's. I think I said it before. I'll probably
Yeah.
say it one more time
Yeah.
before we end this
Yeah.
podcast, but it's so important.
Yeah. Agreed. Now you probably get absolutely no changes from the owner midway construction, not a single one,
For sure, never. No, no,
Never.
never,
How do
never.
you tackle
Owners
those?
never want to change anything.
No, no, they just like the way it is as you've already gone through and you've given
Yeah,
3D
yeah,
renderings and VR.
yeah, of
But
course.
for that one client that does ask for change, how do you
Yeah.
guys, react? Is it usually not a big deal or is it just
Never a
unfortunately?
big deal. We try to be very user friendly. They want to make a change. It's their project. Our philosophy is as long as it's not going to detriment their plants. As long as they
Yeah.
want to do something crazy, like put a wet wall in a greenhouse or something. But if they want to make a change, issue a CO, keep it reasonable, and just move ahead.
Yeah. No, exactly. No, that's pretty much every project in that sense. So we're in construction. We get it. We've talked about changes now, budgets, schedules, materials, everything. The world's upside down half the time. In the news, it's always the tariffs are up and down. And that at the end of the
Hmm.
day, it doesn't matter for me being from Canada and you're from, the US and that stuff. It's still affecting both of us.
Yep.
You're still paying
Yep.
it. We're paying it. It's not helping anyone in that sense. How has that
No.
been trying to
So we did a couple projects that were launching right when the tariffs were becoming an issue.
yeah.
We were able to get a couple orders in beforehand. And we told the client, they weren't really ready for the deposit yet,
Okay.
but we said, hey, we get deposited now, we avoid any possible tariffs. So that worked out well. And then we have another
Yeah.
supplier that they keep tens of millions of dollars in inventory.
Good.
So we got lucky. But again, a lot of parts for the lights, almost exclusively, I don't care if the lights made in the USA, but parts come from China.
Hmm.
So, the lights, the security wiring, steel, that all get affected. But right now, I don't see it as a big issue. Again, I think things have calmed down a little bit,
Yeah.
and we're getting enough notice from the suppliers too that if there is going to be an increase, at least we're able to put it in the budget and the client's aware.
Yeah. So, like one thing you mentioned about you had a supplier doing it, but what about because when I was building my house, I went and
Mm.
basically my AC, that stuff. I wanted to add AC to my place, and the guy could come out the next day, and I was shocked how quickly he could react. And he said, "Man, I've got a warehouse full of items, full of it," and he literally did. He pre-bought everything. Are you doing the same thing with some stuff? Are you pre-buying stuff so you've got it in your warehouse, or is that just not a thing?
Y- Yeah. You know what? Not right now. We're not. I don't really see much of a need. During COVID, we did. During COVID, we saw that there was a need for doors and frames. That we had long lead times on doors and frames.
Uh,
It affected a few of our projects. So we were able to stockpile and buy, but we were doing a lot of dispensaries at that time. If you remember, it was actually it was an essential business, dispensaries,
right.
especially the medicinal ones. So we were allowed to keep working, and we just stockpiled and made doors and frames as we could, so we wouldn't have those issues again.
Right. Yeah. And then we talked about lead times and this. Was there any other kind of high level lead times that are just really really tricky for your projects?
You know what? The only two things right now would be electrical gear, which
Yeah,
I think everybody in the industry has the same issue.
yeah,
And then those panels I was talking about, those
yeah.
insulated metal panels,
Right.
those sometimes can be 14, 16 weeks out. There were some HVAC systems and companies, and I won't name them to
Yeah.
to drag them, but they were at, some of them were at like 58, 60 weeks, which
Right.
is crazy that you're over a year out. And even those came even further delayed. So those affected some projects. Some
Yeah.
of the big brand names in the industry, the go-to, so it's hard to deviate from them. Now there's options, but that was right coming out of COVID.
Right. No, and exactly, and that's hopefully things have gotten better. But yeah, because what is, and you kind of mentioned it earlier, but what is the average once you get the green light to go construction? And again, I know this is a vague
Mhm.
question because it depends on, if you kind of take the three categories, the three type of buildings, what is kind of the average between each one in
Yeah,
terms
great
of,
question. Yep. So average dispensaries, 12 weeks.
okay,
Um, some can be done in 10, some are 14 or 15, but that's the average. That's a confident answer. Um, a cultivation, the sizes range. There's such a variable in size, but I'd say average would be 8 to 12 months
Okay.
on a indoor cultivation project,
Yeah.
and then on a manufacturing, 3 to 4 months.
Wow. Okay. Overall,
Yeah.
like
So
it's not crazy timelines for, you
no,
know.
it's really not. Obviously, if you're doing 100,000 square foot canopy, right? And when I say canopy, that's the flowering rooms, the bloom rooms.
Hmm.
That's probably closer to 2 years. But
Wow. Okay.
average project is again, anywhere between 8 to 12 months for a good indoor grow.
Right. And because you've been doing it so long too, in terms of these timelines and quality assurance is really key because numerous times he's saying if things aren't done right, the product's going to turn bad, and
Hmm.
that's a huge loss. And of course, again, if I was your client, where I'm going to be coming,
Of
whose door I'm going to be
course.
knocking
And
on
and
to that.
and there's even projects where we may not be the designer, or sometimes we're just hired as the general contractor or project manager. And there is a different design team on board. And even then, fingers are pointing everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Luckily, knock on wood, we haven't had those issues, but it's always in my head, right? Again, I think being trained as an attorney, I'm always looking worst case scenario, mitigate risks. And that kind of, goes to my strategy with my team also. Let's double check, triple check. Look, this isn't like building a restaurant, right?
Yeah.
You build a restaurant, you're delayed 1 or 2 months, grand opening is delayed a few months, right?
Yeah.
With this, if you're delayed a few months, you could have hundreds of thousands of dollars dying, across on the other side of town.
Yeah. Yeah, much different than that. And yeah, like
Yeah.
I said, and so you guys have your own quality controls. You got your checking, you've got everything. Make sure that,
Well, that's why I said, yeah, that's why we really have a separate project manager just for the plant touching areas. That
right.
way they've been through these, they know these types of facilities. A lot of times they have grow experience themselves, right? They're
Hmm.
cultivators themselves
Right.
with some construction background. So they're able to talk to the client's grower, able to know what most guys wouldn't know,
Yeah.
right? Know how to anticipate any issues. And when everything's put together and we got a C of O, we still take 3 weeks before we allow them to bring plants in because we want to commission the system.
Hmm.
In cannabis construction, commissioning is maybe the most integral part of the project when it comes to CA. Okay. You really have to dial in the system. You have to have everything run. You have to make sure your lights, your fertigation, your automation, your dehumes, everything's working together so that it's hitting the right temperatures, hitting the right humidity levels. So when you bring those
Yep.
plants in, there's no lag time. You don't want to be dialing it in with the plants in the room.
Right. And you probably got like even with these systems, you've got alarms triggering too. So like if I was a
Oh,
client, I was out and wherever I was on
mhm,
holidays, it would start
yep.
flagging me, in the middle of the night or something.
Oh, 100%. It
Yeah.
even happened a few weeks ago with the client that one of the rooms lost power.
Yeah.
So they got an alarm immediately. They called us, what's going on? We came. A breaker was tripped. I think it was some just random reason.
Yeah.
But they knew immediately. As soon as that breaker got tripped and lost power, they knew. As soon as the humidity, hits a certain level that's not optimal, they'll get an alarm. The
Right.
cool thing these days is everything is on their phone or tablet.
Yep.
So they can see each room and each sector of the room what everything's running at. It's really cool.
That is super cool. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I think that's awesome. Um, Shoot, my mind just dropped before. There was another question about alarms and that kind of stuff. But anyways, no, that's really cool. And with it, is there any advice, lessons, best practices that you want to give to architects, like stuff that you've seen, again, the crazy
Yeah.
RFIs, challenges of like what the heck moments,
You know,
and put it
you know
politely?
what? I go and I speak at different conferences and expos, and really the crux of what I do is, what the pitfalls to avoid, right?
Hmm.
And it all really goes down to the building. Before a client, commits, and I said this earlier, there's a checklist that really makes an optimal facility. And right, retail's retail. Again, it's fairly simple, but on a grow, you want to make sure you have the right ceiling heights, the right roof stability,
Yeah.
infrastructure of power. You have to make sure you have correct drainage, right? Because every room has to have a floor drain. So it's really making sure the infrastructure of the building can take on the type of facility you want to put in there, whether it's 5,000 square feet of canopy or 50,000 square feet of canopy or it all comes down to the type of building because not every building is optimal, and money's so scarce that if you have to put an extra $250,000 into the project because you have to upgrade the building somehow, that could be
Yeah.
a deal killer.
No, exactly. And kind of going back to the point of the alarms too, and just thinking you might have mentioned it, but are you always recommending putting generators in these projects? Because, like you said, if power's going out, the last thing you want to do is
Yep.
lose that. It has that secondary defense. Is that
It,
something you're doing?
yep. It's funny. So, like when I'm talking about the building and the checklist, one of my due diligence items is what's the power grid like? Is it
Mm,
an area that's kind of near the shore where the hurricanes blow in and you lose power, or are you, more inland and rural where it's just not a great grid? So I asked what the grid is like, and if the answer is we lose power once a year for a few weeks at a time, I say, okay, we have to get a generator. And these
yeah.
generators, these are half a million, $1 million generators. These are very large generators, but
Yeah.
you don't have a choice because you can't let the rooms go down.
Right.
If you have a pretty good grid, then what I recommend and advise is, sign a contract with a generator company so that you're first on the list. If you lose power, they back the trailer right up and you plug in. But every facility has to be generator ready, full
Hmm.
stop.
Right. And that totally makes sense. Again, that's one of those things that sucks that it's, an extra million that you weren't thinking of budgeting for. But the reality is what's inside
Yeah.
that store or in that, that
Mm,
operation
right.
building. Well, it's cheap insurance at the end of the day.
Yeah. Right. Right. And we make sure they budget for it in the beginning. Like
Yeah.
that's always in budget number one, generators in there. And it's just a matter of what's the state of the grid, whether we need to do a permanent, rooftop or a
Yeah.
generator, off to the side, or whether it's going to be a trailer that gets hired.
Yeah. And then through the construction process, communication and all that kind of stuff. Again, you guys are again a design build in that respect. You guys probably got a really good system in place when it comes to that. Again, that all goes back to the quality assurance, like you've already talked about
Yeah.
hiring. So again, any kind of
It
tips with
so
that?
our communication is obviously, we have our core team.
Yeah,
We have our vice president of construction, who's more like the general manager, our project manager, who's he's like the head coach. I always say, if football rules, and then our super is like the quarterback, right on site.
yeah,
But communication, we're dealing not just with the owner operator, but their head of cultivation always has a seat at the table. They're very involved in the construction process. Obviously, we do weekly construction meetings. We run everything through a Procore project management system,
yeah,
but we're constantly in communication with their head grower, and or cultivation manager, because they need to know when can I bring plants in. That's all they care about.
yeah,
What stage are we at?
yeah.
But even when we're putting in the benches and the racks and hanging lights, we have to have on-site meetings. Hey, how does this line up for you? This is the height of the lights. Here's they really have to be very involved in all the plant touching rooms.
Right. Yeah. No, and I totally makes sense. So kind of.
Yeah, it's
Oh, go ahead.
like I said, communication is key, on the grows. With the people who are going to be in charge of the plants.
Yeah. No, I agree. And it wasn't just any project too, but I think, yeah,
Oh yeah,
every project communication is really, and I think that's
it's
the one thing
the most
lacking.
important thing.
It is, and
Good or
and
bad, right? You need to tell bad news just as much as you need to tell good news.
I love that quote. I really do because you're right. It's just the state of the nation. What is it? How do we get through it? Let's just rip
Yep.
the band-aid off, get
And
into it, and figure it
yeah,
out. Versus finger pointing, vigorous anything like that. Let's just deal with it.
yeah.
I
In
love that.
in my younger self hated to give bad news, and I'd keep it in and I deal with it internally, and sometimes it would just it turns into something bigger than it could be. So the older me, right, the more
Yeah,
the balder me, the grayer me, now gives the bad news head on if there is bad news.
nice. That's awesome. I love that. I do. So kind of shifting here, future trends, in the kind of retail
Mhm.
construction, again, it's come a long way from where it was out of the back of the van, from
Yeah.
Jimmy,
Oh yeah.
whatever. And now you've got actual
Yes, it is.
facilities and everywhere is different, like you've kind of got this new defining moment. You see it kind of changing. Like a lot are unfortunately are blocked because the
Yeah.
city won't allow them to, open up and keep the windows. You got, like you said, you got a tent. Is there any kind of thing
Yeah.
that, is something new age or that they're trying to do?
Absolutely. I mean, on the retail side, It's a lot of cool concepts, right? Now it's about what's your concept to differentiate you.
Hmm.
So it's not so much that cannabis is, oh, it's new. There's gonna be a line down the block. That doesn't happen anymore. There could be 3 dispensaries in your town. So what concepts are going to differentiate your dispensary from the next one, right? So design concepts very important. Cannabis hospitality is becoming huge. Okay, you're talking about yoga studios where you can have consumption, or there's a consumption lounge up in New York. They bring people in for movies or car
Hmm.
night. Everybody brings in their cars. There's hotels that specialize now in cannabis consumption,
Hmm.
restaurants. So events, in Minnesota, they just released a bunch of licenses. You get event license attached to that. So you can have a concert or stand up comedy night with
Uh,
open consumption. So
right.
cannabis hospitality, it's really coming into its own now. I think you're going to see a lot more cannabis centric lounges. And with that comes, different types of construction in CA, built like a cigar lounge, right? With
Yep.
a really heavy duty exhaust, um, with kind of that bar feel. So I think on the retail side, concept is important. We have hospitality coming into play. And on the cultivation side, AI is here. And it's
Okay.
very cool what
Yeah.
AI is doing into these cultivations facilities. It's going to really help the grower. It's a tool. It's not taking away anybody's jobs,
Yeah.
but what it's doing is allowing you to really increase revenue by almost 30% from what I've seen, and
Wow.
avoid all the risks that you've seen where, for instance, uh, what a lot of operators are afraid of is their plants getting like spider mites, right? Or powdery mildew.
Okay.
What the AI can do is, it's basically like a little iPad that kind of hovers over the plant all day long, and it'll identify those potential risks
Oh
10 to
wow.
2 week 10 days to 2 weeks before the grower can identify it with their naked eye. So
Wow.
imagine if you're an operator, you're able to recognize that this room or these plants have powdery mildew 2 weeks before, a human can, and you can cut your losses and mitigate that. You could save this whole side of the
Yeah.
crop.
Yeah.
Think about how important that is.
Oh, huge. Yeah, like AI is
Yeah.
incredible when I've heard that. There was something I was reading on one of the news articles about like breast cancer and it's kind of seeing that. And like I just again, it's not crippling anyone because it's just like flagging. It's like FY, you may want to look at
Hmm.
this. Let's bring you back in 3 months.
It's
And
a
then
tool.
yeah.
And it's very cool. I'm really dedicating, the second half of the year to learn as much as I can about the different type of AI that we have in the industry,
Yeah.
because I want to be at the forefront of it. I don't want to have to be, catching up.
Yeah, no, and you don't. And I've done a number of talks on CA and AI and then that workforce and
Oh
everything.
yeah,
And
you had a podcast on AI, I think, a few months ago.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, so yeah, I
Yeah,
talked about
yeah,
about that, and yeah, like for you guys, the builder, the Dusty, the robot. And there's even another one too. There's one that hangs drywall now. Like it's just it's advancing. But I like I haven't heard that one. I know because I fly drones and everything too,
yeah,
and you can definitely use that for the agricultural too, right? Or you can
yeah.
just fly a drone and be like, how many trees are there, and it'll just automatically count and just wild, just
Yeah, no,
wild.
it blew my mind when I got the beta test on it. The data that it turns out, and then the growers can't believe it. They're like,
Right.
"Hey, you got all that just from, I mean, to the point of, cannabinoids and THC levels," and it was very cool. And this is just the beginning of it too. So
Exactly.
AI is something I'm very excited about on the cultivation side.
That is really cool. I think, yeah, absolutely. It just stops waste and yeah, and so many benefits.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So as we're kind of wrapping this show up, final thoughts, anything, last remarks on this whole process. I really appreciate it. Like I've learned so much today too. And it's definitely someone thinking they're just gonna jump into it. Whoa, 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 whoa. There's a
You
whole
know,
level of science here.
it, it is. There's so much to it. There's so many moving parts. I think everybody in the industry would say it's still a grind, right? It's very hard to get access to capital. The projects take a long time to get started, but when we go to those ribbon cutting ceremonies, it is by far the most rewarding experience because from the client even getting their license,
Yeah.
right, which probably took them years, then to get the project designed, then to get the capital raised, then to get those permits with the state and the city, then to get through construction. When you're cutting that ribbon, Matt, it is
Yeah.
unbelievable. And so I just think let's keep the optimism out there. It's a great industry. We're all in it on the ground up, the ground floor, going up, but it's a good place to be.
Oh, that's cool. No, thank you for saying that and then for sharing all this. This is awesome. And I really, really appreciate on the show, David. For the listeners, where can they find you?
So again, yep, Grow America is the company. Um, GrowAmericaBuilders.com is the website. And you go to the website, it's got my direct number right on there. If you want to reach me, call me. That's my contact. And we have office in Chicago, New York, New Jersey, and Phoenix. So we literally go coast to coast, and we'll come up north of the border too. I've put out bids
Oh yeah.
in Toronto as well. So, oh yeah,
Nice.
yeah, we'll
Nice.
work anywhere. I tell you, we've actually put out bids in Portugal, Sri Lanka, Lesotho. So wherever there's legal cannabis, we will
Yeah.
go.
You're international. Like that's crazy.
So it's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, appreciate this. It was awesome. And yeah, like anyone listening has more questions, you got an amazing source right here. So I'm going to wrap it up with that. Thank you so much again, David. Really appreciate it. And architects, keep designing. Contractors, keep making those blueprints reality. We'll see you on the next one.